Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Texas Developmental Screening and Surveillance ECHO, brought to you by UT Health San Antonio in collaboration with the Texas Department of State Health Services. My name is Maria Gutierrez. My pronouns are she, her, and I will be facilitating today's session. Before we get started, as always, we'd like to share a few housekeeping reminders. As Karen has chatted already, please do enter your full name and email affiliation into the chat. This will help us with some record keeping. Please do remember to stay muted unless you are speaking. However, we do want everyone to share their opinion and insight, during any Q&A forums or discussions via chat, or also unmuting yourself. As a note, these sessions are being recorded for later distribution, as you have already seen that being prompted. And finally, if you have any connection issues, please reach out to Karen, our wonderful Echo IT, for any assistance. As a reminder, to ensure privacy, no personal health information is allowed at any point during today's session. This does include name, addresses, birthdays, or any other identifying information. Let us always make an effort to avoid being biased or using stigmatizing terms. And this is just so we can continue to have a safe space that is respectful and open and easy and safe for everyone to learn. With that, we can go ahead and move over to some introductions from the Hub team. We have Andrea Horton, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Andrea Horton with Smith County Champions for Children. We're glad you're here with us today.
Thank you, Andrea. We also have Faith Rivera.
Hi, everyone. Faith Rivera with Alice Civitas Consulting. So good to see so many people with their cameras on. This makes me happy.
Thank you, Faith. We also have Dr. Dorothy Mandel.
Hi, Dorothy Mandel with the UT Health School of Public Health.
Thank you, Dr. Mandel. We also have our didactic and case presenter for today, Kristen Elma. If you can introduce yourself. Oh, Kristen, it looks like you are still muted.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending.
Thank you, Kristen. And I think with that, since we have already had you introduce yourself, you may begin your didactic presentation once you're able to share that screen with us.
Okay, well, let's get started. Today's training is on having those hard conversations with parents. When we deal with the public, there's always going to be issues, and this is the time that you must act the most professional. Number one, you must care about the children and their parents or clients, even though this may be difficult at times. And there's that sweet spot in the middle there with child, teacher, parent, counselor, and so forth. You're impacting their future. And this is important because you're not only impacting the parents' future, but you're impacting the children's future in a dramatic way. And unfortunately, we have a lot of children falling through the cracks as far as autism diagnosis and other disabilities, or even just general delays. We have to accept the parents or clients as they are, and then you can build that relationship. If you judge parents or clients for their failures, you cannot build anything. Our common goal, obviously, is the goal to have the child increase in development, gain greater self-control for challenging behaviors. We want that child to succeed, and we want to get that child ready for school learning. So we truly are changing the world when we work with children in these early years. Now, sometimes there's a lot of family members. Now, remember, you got to work with all the family members. Sometimes parents are divorced, and then one might have a significant other and one got remarried. But we need to bring everybody to the table to feel like they belong and are loved for who they are. And we have to decide up front. This is the important part. We have to decide up front to love not only the children, but even those challenging parents and clients. So a strong school parent-child partnership can be a positive factor in supporting and nurturing a child's growing independence and competency. To be a team, though, we have to be able to communicate well and effectively. So what is the definition of communication? It's a process by which a person transmits to another person information, both verbal and nonverbal, about his ideas and feelings, and then we receive that information back. It's important to note that the term process is important because communication is always in the context of an ongoing relationship. It is through the process of communication that we express our wants, our needs, our concerns, as well as our caring and love and admiration for one another. So interestingly enough, researchers have discovered that poor communication can lead to numerous family problems, including excessive family conflict, which then flows over into the child and the child care center, ineffective problem solving, and ding, 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 we're all about serve and return. It can affect weak emotional bonding and thus have behavior problems in children. So basic communication, the sender sends a message to the receiver, and the receiver then sends a message to the sender. So let's talk about some of the communication components. There are gender differences between males and females. There's cultural differences. For example, Asian children are taught to never look you in the eye if they're being reprimanded, and you need to understand those cultural differences. Their school history. Now, this is kind of an interesting one. We're going to talk about having a conference with the parents, and sometimes if they have had a rough school history and they were in the principal's office often, and now you call a meeting, it dredges up all those bad feelings and emotions of being in trouble. And so that can sometimes affect how they communicate. There's generational tendencies. There's a generation of children are to be seen and not heard. Then there's a more involved generation. Some of the more current generations are really busy with multiple jobs, or sometimes addictions to screens themselves, and which then translates to poor bonding and attachment. Family birth order. Are you the firstborn or are you the baby? That makes a difference when you're meeting with a parent. If they're the baby, a lot of times things are just taken care of for them, and they might look to you to just handle it all instead of truly becoming involved and enmeshed in their child's needs. What kind of day they have had. You know, they got yelled at their boss. They spilled coffee all over their clothes. And now at pickup time, when everything's really crazy, you want to have a quick discussion in the hallway while other parents are walking by. That's really going to affect the communication at that point. And even learning style preferences. Are they auditory learners? Are they visual learners? We're going to talk about why it's important to have certain papers and tools. Personal biases. Personal biases, not only from the parents, but personal biases from us as well. So it's really important for communication that we examine our own personal biases and leave them at the door. And then past daycare issues. Has their kid been kicked out multiple times? They thought that it was the daycare when lo and behold, it was the child has an issue or clinic issues and so forth. So nonverbal accounts anywhere from 73 to 98% of communication. So, for example, Andrea or Andrea. Now, I just said one word, but I communicated two very different things. So that first time, you're in trouble, girl, right? And you knew that because the tone of voice, you knew that because the volume was loud. I had my arms crossed, so body posturing. I was staring down at her. And so we have to be mindful. And this is really hard because some of us wear all of our emotions on our face. And so we have to school ourselves sometimes to control those nonverbal communications. And so also, are we invading their bubble? Are we being respectful? And touch. Are you touching the kids softly, or are you manhandling them, or male and female differences? And then, of course, there's cross-cultural differences as well, like eye contact. In Asia and the Scandinavian countries, our bubbles are really big. In India and some South American countries, our bubbles much smaller. America, it's about an arm's length away. So knowing those differences is important, because if you've got someone whose bubble's really small and they're here, then you don't necessarily want to pull back because they might find that offensive. Now, just a side note, ADHD kids and even our young adults want to still talk to us right here. And so understanding that personal part for ADHD is also important. So your nonverbal communication must reflect a positive nature when communicating with others. So that means in addition to nonverbal, we have verbal, we have written notes, emails, modeling. Actually, modeling is often the best form of communication. For example, if the kids are getting really loud, then you want to soften your voice, not yell over them. And appearances. When you're having meetings with staff, parents, other professionals that are coming into your center or clinic, like ECI, Head Start, and so forth, then we want to dress appropriately. We want our center to look well and our room to be set up appropriately. And then parents always love to have photos of children that are doing activities at your center. Okay, so let's talk about the types of listening, because this is important when you're having meetings with parents. There's inactive listening. Sometimes I once had a parent who, during a conference, pretty serious conference, was just on her phone. She had just checked out emotionally, and really was not listening to anything being said. And then we have selective listening. That would be for our significant others sometimes. I told you to take the trash out. I didn't hear you. But the two, of course, that we want to talk about is active listening and reflective listening. So the 5 parts of active listening is you're going to listen to the content, but more importantly, you have to listen to the intent. What is it that they're truly trying to convey to you? You want to look at the speaker's nonverbal communication. Are their arms closed? Are they staring at you with anger through their eyes? Or are their eyes getting full of tears? And we have to then monitor our own nonverbal communication and emotional filters at that point. Now, we want to listen to the speaker with empathy, but without judgment. I used to work for ECI, and I had a meeting set up with the school district to get 2 of her children into the PPCD class. Both had disabilities. This mama lived in a trailer. She had 9 children. She had no car. She depended on her sister-in-law to take her to the grocery store and other places. I suggested that I come pick her up because if you know, when you have those ARD meetings, there's 13 people or more in that room. So trying to juggle 13 different schedules and finally find a day that's open was, really difficult. And this trailer was just so bad. She had 2 broken windows. She had holes in the flooring, and she didn't show up. And so at first I was kind of put out with her. So I drove over to her house, and she said, well, a snake had come up through the floorboard. And so she couldn't leave her other children with a snake crawling around her trailer. And so we've got to be careful that we don't jump to conclusions or judgment too quickly. And so once I actively listened to her, then everything was fine. 3 parts of reflective listening. So obviously it includes good active listening, but sometimes we have to be a psychologist. We have to provide feedback to the speaker. So a lot of you know that a psychologist, you'll say, yeah, the sky is blue. And then the psychologist will say, so what you're telling me is the sky is blue. So we do want to rephrase the speaker statements so that we can, in fact, try to truly understand. At this point, sometimes I even take notes so I don't get lost in what they're trying to tell me. And I want you to remember the power of the pause, because sometimes some of us are ADHD ourselves, and we want to jump in and say what's on our mind so we don't lose that thought, which is why I sometimes take notes, because we need to give that parent a chance to truly say what they're feeling. And then once again, we want to lean into the emotion, but without judgment. So what are some barriers to communicating well? Are you grilling the parent or interrogating them? Are you trying to dominate the conversation? And that's a hard one, because sometimes with our training that's required each year, we do have more knowledge than the average parent on certain topics, not all, but certain topics. Don't do inappropriate self-disclosure. We have to be careful about that one because sometimes we don't even realize that what we're saying isn't appropriate. Distancing patterns. Are you yourself crossing your arms and legs and leaning back away from them? Don't use crude language or jargon. I was in a teacher's room and she kept calling the children turds. And and this was, y'all, this was a CDA observation on top of it. And after about 5 or 6 times, I said, why are you calling them turds? And she said, no, I didn't. I said, yes, this is the 5th time. And she said, oh, well, that's what I call my own children. So you have to be careful that what you call your own children doesn't morph over into what you talk to the parents about. And no moralizing or admonish them. For example, don't tell them to just take their kid home and spank them because they're bad, right? I had a director call a mom up to come to the daycare to bite the child. Well, number one, an adult biting a child in Texas is against the law. It's a form of child abuse. But in this way, the director was actually kind of admonishing the parent by saying it's your fault that the child is biting. Don't be patronizing or condescending. Don't talk down to them. Don't use pressure tactics. Well, if your child does it one more time, they're out. Yes, sometimes children need to be dismissed, but more so, sometimes it's the parents, not the child, that needs to be dismissed. Do you understand that one? When you've worked and worked and worked, and then the parent isn't on board. And we'll talk more about planting the seed. And stress issues. Okay. All sorts of stress issues can be barriers to communicating well. And some, when parents are experiencing stress, then of course the children are affected as well. That impacts the behavior not only of the children, but the parents. And that in turn affects your classroom and your child care center at large. So let's look at all the different stress issues. We have death in the family, loss of a job, resource issues, mental health issues, drug and alcohol issues. Parent is hospitalized, new baby, taking care of elderly parents, potty training, special needs, eating issues, sleeping issues, multiple jobs, debt, pregnancy, all sorts of issues with marital separation, divorce, blended families, extended families, unusual family structures. And then that affects what happens in the brain, both yours and theirs. So when we're under stress, that amygdala releases cortisol. And now, during those intense periods, we cannot think logically. We're not up there in the neocortex. We're in drama queen, limbic system. And so personality traits also affect how you communicate with one another. So this is a joke, but a lot of times we have pushy parents, apologetic parents, full of tears, she's my baby parent, and so forth. But what kind of personality do you have? You have to do self-reflection because your personality may not necessarily mesh with their personality. And once you know that, then you can take steps in order to deal with it better. When we're stressed, we often have bad attitudes that will impact how you communicate with the parents and staff. And often we have issues with challenging behaviors or that the child has delays. Now, you often are the first to detect delays. So I want you to be careful when you're talking about delays because it really is kind of the death of a dream. You have to come to these conferences prepared. And so we need to do our developmental checklists. And remember, they are going to go through those 5 stages of grief. The Kubler-Ross grief cycle is denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And sometimes it takes parents a long time to actually come to the acceptance part. I was asked to look at a little boy that was clearly on the autism spectrum. The dad did not believe so. And so they decided to not continue at the daycare, kept the child home for 2 years, tried to put him in a fancy private school who told him the same thing I had told him. But eventually they did get help. So often parents are overwhelmed by the uncertainty of the path they have to travel, and they're bombarded by everything all the experts have to say. It's difficult to sift through all that information. Other considerations, early brain development, gender differences, once again, cultural differences, home environment. And it's good to know that the brain is plastic. So even though you may receive a child that comes from extreme deprivation, you can change their brain to be a healthy child with love and nurture and so forth. And it's also good to know that certain behaviors are going to be affected by drugs or trauma like car accidents and so forth. So start in a private area. I'm just going to do a few more slides and then we'll wrap up for the case study. Pick a time convenient for both of you. Try to have both parents attend. That's really, really important. Ask the parent if the concerns you have about the child also happen at home. Ask them how they deal with those concerns. Give them a blank developmental checklist that they can fill out on their own. You bring, this is important, you bring your completed developmental checklist, and then at the end of the conversation, they can take both checklists to their pediatrician. So it's important to not let issues grow. You need to address it before it gets out of hand. And so I want you to start hourglass method. Start with several positive statements about the child, state the problem, ask suggestions help, and then end with a positive statement. Back up everything with examples, running records, checklists, and so forth. People tend to only remember the negative things more than the positive. And if they only remember negative, then they think that you don't like the child, and pretty soon they're pulling the child and you're not helping them out. So see the parent also as the expert. Ask them about the child's strengths and areas that they think need support. Plan time for this conference to not be interrupted. Let the parents know that the child or children are not to come. And then set the mood. Find an inviting place to meet. And, you know, I think it's a good idea to offer them some coffee or water. It kind of, we're a southern state, so it kind of makes them feel good hospitality. And tactfully mention those concerns, but empower the parents to be advocates and propose professional advice as needed. So here's a sample dialogue. Tell me about how Johnny handles anger at home. The parent talks, we repeat what the parent said. Then the parent talks again, repeat what was said, ask if there's anything else. Thank you for sharing. Thank you. I will try those things. Let's get back together in a few weeks. Here's some ideas that I have that might help. And, remind them that the goal is the betterment of the child. Follow up, reflect on what was said, try some things with the child, report what happened, give positive comments, and then empower those parents. Help with referrals, be supportive, use factual information and websites so that there's consistency between home and school. ECI for children under 3, local school district, or private therapy for 3 and above. Now, dealing with difficult parents, this is a really important part because it's their new reality. An important part of communication is trying to understand not only what the person is saying, but also why they're saying that or behaving in that difficult manner. Remember, strong emotions are a form of communication. So anger actually may be a form of fear. We need to understand that. We need to have empathy. Parents often feel
I do apologize for interrupting, but if just want to let you know if you could wrap up in the next few minutes or so. So
Yes.
we won't have enough time for case discussion. Thank you. Apologies.
Okay, yeah. Remember, your position is to be a learner and bridge builder, but we also have to set professional boundaries when dealing with someone that is very angry. The best way to deal with that is the power of the pause. So you listen and you listen some more until it almost becomes uncomfortable. They need to vent. If you interrupt, they're going to get even angrier. You yourself have to stay calm, keep good eye contact, verify what you're hearing, so rephrase it. Focus on the issue, not the person or the emotions. Work towards a win-win solution. Switch to problem-solving mode. Use your I statements. Thank them for letting you know how they feel about the issue. And once again, reassure them that you have the child's best interest. Okay. Maintaining your boundary means that you're emotionally honest, direct, and self-enhancing and appropriately expressive. The sender feels confident, self-respecting, and the receiver should then feel your respect. So I'm going to skip ahead. Be sincere, always be respectful, be honest, brag on the child, and give positive feedback when that child is present. Never talk about the child, though, over the child's head. Find humor, keep realistic expectations. And here we go, last slide. Too often we underestimate the power of a touch, a smile, a kind word, a listening ear, an honest compliment, or the smallest act of caring, all of which have the potential to turn a life around. That's our job. We're turning lives around when we help these parents with those challenging behaviors, delays, and undiagnosed disabilities. Okay, that's all for that one.
Thank you so much, Kristen, and apology for the interruption. I do want to make sure we have enough time for the case discussion. With that, Hub team, would you like me to still go through announcements, or we can go and just share that via chat and start getting everyone ready for breakout rooms? I don't know if Andrea or Faye, either one of you have a preference.
I think if you want to go ahead and share them real quick, just so people make sure they get their certificate.
Yeah, that's what I was
Sounds
going to say.
good.
Share that certificate link for sure.
Yes. Karen, if you can just pull up the evaluation slide, please, and then we'll go ahead and move over to breakout rooms. As Karen is getting that ready for everyone, please don't forget to claim credit using your TextPeds account or scanning the QR code that will be shared shortly. If not, we'll also make sure to share that via link for everyone. And as a reminder, we will be moving into breakout sessions in just a moment. This will ensure that everyone has about 10 to 15 minutes of case discussion with our wonderful hub team today, and then we'll be moving back to the main session where we'll all get back together and have a representative from each breakout room kind of give us a summary of what was discussed. Please remember that, to have a group representative. So our hub team, I'd definitely be relying on your expertise for this. And then everyone just be on the lookout for that breakout session once our wonderful IT Karen is able to pop that up for everyone.
Do you want me to talk about the case study at all?
Oh, yes. Apologies for that. Go ahead, Kristen.
Okay. So I had a conference with the teacher, director, and parents. The daycare had had very big concerns about this child for a year and a half or more. At the meeting, this little boy was clearly on the spectrum. When I got the developmental checklist back, I had them do another checklist, the ASQSE. I then also during the conference did an MChat, which is another little screening for autism. And so we were well prepared with documentation. But when we began the discussion, Dad got really mad and lunged at my face. I mean, really close. He was that close. And so I did not back up. I, in fact, leaned in a little bit to let him know that I had a boundary. But I had to let him vent. And Dad was really coming from the place of fear. I don't know what autism's about. What does this look like for my son? But it was showing as anger. And so I let him talk and talk and talk and talk until it was almost uncomfortable silence. And then about the time he took a deep breath, then I could come in. So that's a really good, by the way, sign to look for. And in fact, by the end of the session, Dad kind of had a sarcastic humor. And so I liked that. And so I was able to kind of bond with Dad through that humor and help him understand the journey and what was going to happen and so forth. So by the end of the conference, we were all laughing. They felt better about what was happening. And then, of course, I gave them my information for follow-up as well.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. Apologies for me getting so excited to get everyone in breakout rooms that we almost missed a case discussion, but everything is going on perfectly fine now. But now that we're all back in one session, I'd like for everyone from their designated breakout room to kind of let us know what was discussed, what were some key topics. I know I was in the breakout room with Faith. I don't know if you want to go ahead and start us off, Faith.
Sure. So we had some great discussion. There was a question asked that we didn't get to, so we'll just pose it to the group, and anyone please feel free to put in the chat. But one of our participants asked for anyone who uses technology for communication with parents versus just email or text message. So any of y'all that can put your thoughts in the chat, that'd be great. But our group really talked about some of those nonverbal cues when communicating with families to try to assess where they're at and trying to stay level set and kind of calm while you're within the conversation with families. And understanding the depth of what they're going through. In a lot of these situations, they may feel like they have lost a lot of control. And so giving them opportunities for insight, giving them opportunities to answer questions, or even direct where they want to go with their child to hopefully help them sense some of that control again, or take back a little bit of that control with how they choose to move forward with their child. Some of the tools that were mentioned is, sometimes just that old paper and notebook, pencil and paper, taking notes on conversations, having logs of what communication was happening with parents from the teacher and the director's perspective, documenting everything from both points of view, and then really ensuring that we're using the proper tools to kind of take some of our bias and emotions out of it, but utilizing the checklists and the screenings really to guide the conversation of, this is not just what Faith thinks is happening developmentally, but this is what the tools are kind of showing us.
Thank you, Faith. I'll go ahead and pass it over to Dr. Mandel.
Sure. In our group, we also talked about like less emotionally charged conversations, but are conversations that still focused on that can lead to a lot of conflict between the child care center and the parent, in particular around different ideas around potty training. And one of the things that we talked about is, what is the root if the parent and the child care center aren't on the same page? What's the root cause for maybe the parent being hesitant around potty training? Even when the child care center is like, the baby's going, we're good. And how the child care center can also use their processes and their procedures to help encourage parents to follow through and get on the same page with everybody around potty training. So that's a lot of what we talked about.
Thank you, Dr. Mandel. I'll go ahead and hand over to Andrew if you'd like to give us a summary of your breakout room, and then also a final summary of overall for today's session.
Great. Thank you, Maria. Yeah, so our group was able to talk about, really kind of went back to that idea that this is all happening within the context of our relationship. And so how we know about our families and what we know about them, and how we've engaged with them in the past may have a reflection on how they respond to us. And it can come out as, some people are just so happy to finally have some answers, and then others are devastated that you would even bring this up. But a lot of times they do come back around and later recognize that, if you get that opportunity to meet them a few years later, and they have realized that the things that you were saying were right. My guess is that doesn't happen a whole lot. We also talked about just kind of when we get into those high intensity moments, just kind of taking a break, taking a pause, coming back to it in a few minutes or maybe even another day. And then just remembering that our parents' experience with those children is not always the same as at the school. So the children act differently at school than they do at home. And, that parent's first initial reaction may really be that their child doesn't act like that because they truly haven't experienced that. And then the last thing we talked about is just emphasizing that our goal is for the children's success. And so we want to see their success here and today in this center or in this environment, but we also want them to have success later in life. And so we're not doing this out of spite, but out of a true desire to see that child thrive. And so that's kind of what we discussed in our group. I did share a couple of suggestions to Faith's question about what kind of resources or what kind of, well, it wasn't Faith's question, but it was in the chat about what kind of technology do people use. And so just real quick, we utilize two different programs, Bright by Text and the CDC's Milestone app, and really try to get parents invested in hearing ongoing before there's a problem even, the things that their child should be doing so they can recognize healthy development and recognize when it's not healthy development. But then just to summarize today, so a great session about having good conversations, and it starts with just how do we communicate? And so how are we at both speaking clearly about what we need and what we want to get out of this conversation, about our nonverbal communication, and how are we expressing ourselves? How does the environment impact the way people take the words that we say? But then also practicing active listening and reflective listening, and really having empathy without judgment, which I think is a great phrase to keep in mind when we're listening to families, and we may agree with them or we may disagree with them. And then really trusting the process, that planting a seed may be where you're at today, and it may be somebody else's job to water it and someone else's job to see it grow. But we can trust that process, and that that family is going to get there in their time. And then really just kind of finalizing with the power of the pause. And so being able to take that pause and take some time to let people have a moment to reflect about what they've heard, about what they've said, and be able to support them and help them make a good decision for their child.
Thank you so much, Andrew, and everyone for joining today's session. Such a great and lovely discussion. I do want to remind everyone about some things that have been posted in the chat. Please complete a post-session survey using that first link. Please let us know any feedback you have for the session, and as far as any upcoming interest as well, so we can include that in our curriculum. And then as well, to claim any credits, please feel free to use the TechPeds link as well in the chat. All of this information will be sent out to everyone on Monday via post-session communication. And as a reminder, our next session will be on April 11th at 1 o'clock as well. Details are currently being finalized, but once all that is being finalized, we'll share the final flyer with everyone, make sure it goes out. So please feel free to continue joining our sessions. Check your email for any upcoming presentations and information. And with that, we thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you. Have a good day.